But man, joint practice is big, especially when you're doing it against the Houston Texans, right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
about as good as it can get in terms of joint practices for a young team that's trying to figure out all kinds of things. And I feel like when we talk about joint practice, right, guys, we got to start with, Kirk and Fernando splitting reps with the ones. Is that something that surprised you guys to hear that they were splitting reps?
No, not at all. This is
Yeah.
something that Coach Clint Kubiak mentioned after the preseason opener against Arizona Cardinals. That Mendoza. He also mentioned Aiden O'Connell in that, and when he in excuse me, in that sentence that they all deserve first team reps. But when he said that, I was focused on Fernando Mendoza, and I think he was really saying that directly towards him. That Mendoza, from what we've seen, he deserved those reps. And those are much needed reps. How can you have a
Yep.
quarterback battle? How can you have a quarterback battle without him getting some extensive rep with the first team offensive line against a talented defense as the Houston Texans? So it wasn't
Yeah.
surprising to see him go out there because that's what he needs. Because that's how you evaluate where he's at moving forward. And I've said this probably when it came out that the Raiders were going to go compete with Houston Texans in joint practice. I said this for like wow on like multiple like radio shows and stuff like that. Was like, this is going to be the time this is the week right here, and it's going to be the determining factor of how this quarterback battle is going to finish out in terms like this is where they're going to get as much film as possible to see how
Yeah.
can where
Yeah.
Mendoza at from a developmental standpoint, and where's the gap at between him and Kirk Cousins. Even though Kirk Cousins is going to be the guy to begin the year, you kind of want to know you want to know where's that gap at, that developmental gap is between Cousins and Mendoza, in case you do need you need to throw Mendoza out there some earlier than normal during the regular season.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like I agree with Ryan because I don't think it was surprising at all, and it was a perfect test for Fernando too to get some looks against a first team defense, and I mean one of the best, if not the best, defense in the NFL. Like it's a perfect way because you get to see what they have. Well, we get to see what we have in Fernando Mendoza in a controlled environment because,
Hmm.
well, as it was announced today, the Texans aren't going to be starting any of their starters. So, like I said, when you're in practice, you get to try a lot of things out, and I think it was good to see.
Yeah.
Him, Kirk Cousins. I mean, it wasn't the best day according to a lot of reports. I know we'll get into that a little bit, but at least. At least it's okay to make mistakes in those practices than it is to make mistakes when you're out there starting. So no surprise at all. I just didn't. I'm surprised that we didn't get to see a little bit or hear too much about Aiden O'Connell getting any
Yeah.
snaps. But I know he's not really in the competition. But just overall, like, not really
Yeah,
surprised with
he's trying to
Fernando.
gas him up. I mean, let's keep it real. You know what I mean? Like it's Kirk and Fernando. Like if we're being
Yeah,
completely honest about that. And yeah, like I'm with you guys too. Like it would have been malpractice to draft a guy number one overall and not give him first team reps against
yeah,
a team like the
yeah,
Texans in joint practices, or no matter who the heck you're going against in joint practice. Like you would have had to see that because I know over the years, and Ryan, like you can attest to this too. Every team you cover in the NFL, whenever you talk to these guys, they say they get more out of joint practices than they do the preseason games because the coaches aren't worried about like showing their entire defense. Now, if you're playing a team later in the year, yeah, they might withhold a bit, defense or offense, honestly, in terms of what they're throwing out there because they're not worried about it being on tape, whereas like the world can see it all in the preseason. They're running a lot of vanilla looks and things like that. So this is your opportunity to get real looks at guys. And as we talked about, like we weren't there, but from reporting from our homie Sam Warren, even Ted Wynn from The Athletic was out there, a couple of guys here from Raider Nation Radio, all that stuff. They were all out there reporting it, did a great job covering things for us while we weren't there. And, we hear that Fernando threw a pick in the red zone, would be pick 6 to Jalen Petrie, a play prior. I think it was a near pick. On that one. And then Kirk also threw a pick 6 in the red zone period as well. So kind of an up and down day for both. But Fernando had one where it looked like he kind of escaped pressure, hit Brock Bowers for like the deepest shot of the day, the biggest chunk play offensively. And then Kirk as well, having moments where he looked good too. So I'm curious, like from what you guys heard out of joint practice as it pertains to both Kirk and Fernando, what stood out to you? Good, bad, ugly, whatever it is.
I think one thing that stood out to me is just hearing the comments from guys like Will Anderson and CJ Stroud and how they say, like, Fernando has a bright future.
Yeah.
It's just one
yeah,
practice. And then for the Texans, they just got one sample size of what, Fernando Mendoza could be. But like, there's some pretty good remarks coming from an established quarterback in this league and one of the better edge rushers in the game right now, Will Anderson. So, I take that as a sign of, growth and he's making steps in the right direction. You don't want to make turnovers, but at the same time, he did hit Brock Bowers. It was reported that he hit Brock Bowers on a big play. So you see that progress. You see opponents are noticing that progress. And I think one thing CJ Stroud mentioned, and this can even be a topic for another show, but like he said, you hope the Raiders build around Mendoza. And to me, that's the key right there. The Raiders got that franchise quarterback. It's just a matter of, can they build around this guy and
read between the lines in that one. Sorry to jump in, Ryan, but like that's like when a guy says something like that, they tell you like he's that dude. He needs help though. That's what he's saying, right?
Yeah. Most definitely. And like and we all knew that. They're building the pieces. You already got Brock Bowers in the building. Asking Genty's going to year 2. Maybe you get something out of Malik Benson as a sleeper pick, but like there's still a lot of work. But they are making the necessary strides in terms of doing that. But if you want to get the best out of Mendoza, as the franchise quarterback, it will take the whole team putting the right pieces around him so he can succeed.
Yeah, I think the main thing is like what Ryan said again. Like, I think it's the upside. A lot of these guys are seeing the upside with Fernando. Of course, he's not going to be a perfect quarterback, but he's showing a lot of good things to really be, excited about, especially with his growth. And I think one thing that I took away from, I forgot who reported it, but it was from the Texans side where they were saying like, Fernando Mendoza, even though he wasn't perfect, he looked like he took command of the offense in his pre-snap. Like it looked like he was like his pre-snap. Like leading in pre-snap, and it was something that definitely showed out there. But another thing that I seen that for Kirk Cousins, I don't know if you guys seen it too. I guess he kind of got heated at the end of practice yesterday.
I did hear that,
yeah. He got heated in the practice, and I guess somebody hit his arm again. This is something that him and Max Crosby went back and forth about. But he had that whole thing talking about it. Like you can touch me everywhere, anywhere. Oh. Pause. You can touch me anywhere, but like just don't touch my arm, And I was like, oh dang, what was the point of the red jerseys? But overall, I think I love the fact that the quarterbacks overall, Kirk and Fernando, struggled a little bit because that's what happens at practice. That's what you want to see, and it's not about just making the mistakes, but how you bounce back from it. But this is I think the first time both of these guys really got a lot of pressure from a different defense, right? Especially like the Texans. I know you're going up against the Raiders defense, and we've always been hearing, I know you guys reported a lot of times Kirk Cousins is balling out at practice, right? But then again, after watching him against the Cardinals, I don't know if it's really the Raiders defense or it's just the Raiders offense that are really good. So going up against a really elite defense like them, it really puts into perspective how the Raiders are right now, and it kind of tempers my expectations on them overall, especially that quarterback position. But yeah, I think overall it was a good it was a tough day, but I think a learning experience overall for both of these guys.
And I think that's a good way to look at it, TJ. And I think a lot of fans should look at it that way because it's like the litmus test. Because like also like you have to keep it real about where this team is at. And I feel like we've all done a good job of being real about where the Raiders are at in terms of building, and that this is really, I know fans are tired of it, but a foundational year. And if they get it right, like it can set them up for big success in the future. And so like this is likely, at least I've been saying this, I don't want to put words in your guys' mouth, but like a 6 to maximum 8 win team. And this is a Texans team that's competing for some deep playoff runs, So like you have to keep it real in that sense. And also too, brand new coach, brand new quarterback, brand new system, both sides of the ball. You have a first-time play caller, at least as a head coach in Clint Kubiak. And then now with Rob Leonard now moving to the defensive coordinator. So like it should look bad this time around against a team like that. You should walk away thinking like, okay, they've got a lot of things they got to work on. And I think that's probably more eye-opening to the players too, of like, hey, in practice, I'm feeling myself, I'm doing, whatever, whoever it is, maybe like a Hezekiah Mass. It's not saying that I heard anything about him struggling or anything, but like a kid like him or a Malik Benson or Fernando, not that he gets high on himself or whatever, but like they can sit back and be like, yeah, okay, no, like this is an area we really have to correct and have like a kind of a come to Jesus moment at this point. And that's something that can accelerate a lot of the growth, I think, going forward for this team because of that. And so, like, I'm very curious, even though the starters aren't playing in the preseason game, how the Raiders look offensively, defensively, all that different stuff.